The world followed her. As she walked, the world followed her, as she found herself still unwelcomed by a world that had rejected her, a world that she had fallen into. And words had been forgotten, been lost in the uncertain oceans of trepidation. She walked so far, she had almost left the city. She had become bonded with her fears, and they walked beside her. She remembered flashes of light and sharp objects cutting her side open. She remembered the mind is easily open when you let yourself be taken over by the forces of truth that invade the spaces where you always thought you were comfortable. And the oceans tempted her to come and dive into their abyss. She became close friends with those who never met her. She began to live life as if she had never died, and tried to find herself in the empty space between charity and denial, life and desertion, desperation and truth. Her father wept over her body, and then gambled what was left of his money, and learned to fire a pistol, and learned to steal to survive. And Serenity waited outside the prison, where her father sat and wept. But he didn't recognize her. He only watched as she asked him 1,000 questions, but was led out of the room before she could ask them all. And then she left the prison, and went to her mother's grave, and laid a flower on the grave. And then the flower wilted, and blew across the city because of the breeze. And then pop stars took the flowers that had wilted, and played music as the flower bounced off of their guitars. The wilted flower flew across to another city, where trash littered the streets. This rose ended up in a trash can, and it was incinerated with the rest of the trash, and burned so much that its chemical makeup was destroyed. And when the chemicals were finally gone, these chemicals flew up into space and reached the moon, where the gods of ancient Greece waited patiently for the last believer to reject them. And Serenity walked the path to the homeless shelter and applied for a job as a trash person to clean up the city that was overflowing with trash. They didn't accept her for the position, so she went and did it for free, and stood outside as people watched, and the whole world followed her as she began to sing a song she had only known before the first time she died. And she was the only one alive who had been dead before. She was the only one in the world that had seen the other side. Then, one day, she decided to tell people who she was, and that she was really Serenity, come back to life. But since no one could document where she came from, they sent her to an asylum, where she waited for a year or so, for the time on the wall to expire, and she spilled all her truth about the monster that ended her life, and the memory of the sad lament and kiss of pain, as she thrived in the nights when there was no one moving at the corner of the ward. And she admired the sunlight in the mornings and fell deeply and madly in love with this sunlight. And then they led her out of the ward and threw her violently onto the street, where the same cycle repeated again and again. The same days she spent alone. She knew she had changed so much. But the world had not changed at all.